Well, how about that? Microsoft just laid off 1,900 employees in one of their gaming divisions, and not a single member of the union within that division was laid off. So, in this video, I'm going to go over these recent layoffs and just what the video game industry has been going through as a whole over the past year. It's been a disaster. And I'm also going to get to that piece about unions and how this may be at least one of the potential solutions to what the games industry is going through right now. So first here, just to set up this story, 35%, this is from gamesindustry.biz, as will the next 7 headlines, 7 or 8. 35% of devs affected by layoffs last year, says GDC survey. So 7 respondents had been laid off, while 17% saw colleagues let go, and another 11% reported layoffs elsewhere in their companies. It was a great year for game releases, a terrible year for game developers. Just unprecedented layoffs, and I'm going to get to how those layoffs last year compared to this year, and you may be shocked at how terrible it is already. But this is a little taste, I guess. All of these headlines I'm about to show you over the next, again, 7 or 8, they're all within the last week or so. So this is from just yesterday, or sorry, today. Black Forest Games reportedly cuts 50% of employees. Riot lays off 530 staff. People Can Fly reduces its workforce by more than 30 employees. Behavior Interactive lays off 45 employees. CI Games lays off 10% of its staff. 31st Union lays off small number of staff. Pixelberry Studios lays off staff. Thunderful announces restructuring that will cut 20% of its workforce. And in addition to that, we've had Discord, which you could also consider quasi in the games industry. 70% of its staff was cut. Twitch cut a third of its staff, and Unity has cut 25% of its workforce. That's all within this month. And now, of course, we have Microsoft laying off 1,900 Activision-Blizzard and Xbox employees, which comes just a day after Microsoft announced that it is a $3 trillion company. They just can't find the money. $3 trillion. Now, yes, that's its market cap, but go take a look at their profits. It's not like Microsoft is hurting. But no, we're going to acquire this company and then lay off almost 2,000 of them. Now, I should give the context here, so in case you're not aware, Microsoft, through a long legal battle last year with the FTC, eventually won its bid to acquire Activision-Blizzard. Activision-Blizzard, headed by Bobby Kotick, who is a terrible person, was already going through issues. If Microsoft didn't acquire them, they likely would have had layoffs anyways. It's hard to play that game to know, how many layoffs they would have had compared to now. Regardless, Activision-Blizzard was not going through a good time under Bobby Kotick. Issues would have arose. There would have been layoffs. So it's not like this is the only reason there are layoffs because of the acquisition. But it's worth noting that this massive company worth $3 trillion acquired Activision-Blizzard and lays off 2,000 people. Bobby Kotick, despite being a terrible human being, left with $15 million. And that's the golden parachute. That's in addition to the roughly, $400 million? $400 million that he took through the sale of his shares. He leaves fat and happy, literally, and employees lose out. These cuts work out to roughly 8% of the overall Microsoft gaming division. That stands at around 22,000 employees in total. But don't worry. Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, said it was a painful decision. He's very disturbed and hurt by having to cut all these employees, destroying their livelihoods. It's a very painful decision for him. As Matt Piscatella, who's a games industry analyst, wrote on Twitter, the main takeaway all these layoff statements seem to want the reader to walk away with is how painful it is for management. Getting real old. Completely agree with Matt. It's, I guess, what do you expect them to say, right? They're going to pretend they care. They're going to do... The issue is the layoffs. The issue is these layoffs and nothing happening to management. No one taking a pay cut. They're up. Phil Spencer's fine. They're all fine. Yet everyone being affected are working under them. As Yang Ye, who by the way is the does the voiceover for Kiru in the new Like a Dragon, writes here on Twitter, it's not even February, and 2024's total games industry layoffs, about 5,600, is already well over half of 2023's total of about 10,500. So if this trend continues, and I can't imagine it's going to continue the way it is, I mean, it would be wild if, I mean, if this trend continues, that just might be the end of video games. But we could be looking at, 10 times the amount of layoffs. You have to assume at this point it's going to be at least double what it was last year because of what we've seen already in January. It's no coincidence that, look, this is happening. A lot of industries are facing layoffs, of course, but it really feels like the games industry is being hit very hard. And I don't think it's any coincidence that there is very low union membership within the games industry compared to other industries. That has to play at least a piece here. And I'm going to get to more on that later on in this video. But also part of the layoffs, Blizzard's previously announced survival game has also been canceled. And this is the best you could hope for from the head of a company. It's Satoru Iwata of Nintendo, who has since passed. But this is a quote from Iwata back in, I believe, 2013. I'll get to that in a second. But here's his quote. If we reduce the number of employees for better short-term financial results, employee morale will decrease. I sincerely doubt employees who fear that they may be laid off will be able to develop software titles that could impress people around the world. Satoru Iwata understood the impact that layoffs have on employee morale and understood how that could impact the people making the games, ultimately impacting the company as well. Do you know what he did? He took a pay cut. Not once, but twice. He reduced his pay by half. Can you imagine any president in the West? I've never, like, this is one example I can think of where this has ever happened. This may be a more common thing in Japan. It's not common at all in North America. I have not seen this happen once in any situation, let alone half of your pay being cut. So just to give some clarity on that quote, that was from 2013. That's when the Wii U wasn't doing very well. But this is the initial layoffs, or the initial pay cut, I should say, in 2011. This is after the 3DS wasn't doing well. And they marked down the 3DS, which I just want to mention because at the time they marked it down to 170. If I could find a brand new 3DS for 170 bucks, I would run so fast to purchase that. 3DSs now are very hard to find in good shape and for an affordable price. So it's just wild to think I should have bought more 3DSs back then. But he took another pay cut of 50% in 2014 after the Wii U wasn't doing well. And again, it wasn't just him, it was also, I believe, other people within Nintendo as well in the executive branch. They all took pay cuts. Shigeru Miyamoto also took a pay cut. Again, one of the creative masterminds behind Mario and many Nintendo franchises, took a pay cut of 30% and 20%. So the heads of the company took pay cuts. Unheard of. Would be completely unheard of for Microsoft or any of these big companies to do the same. Now, this is a very important piece of this. Stephen Totilo writing here, a games journalist, writing, worth bearing in mind that the Activision-Blizzard King deal was cheered on by major labor unions, which, by the way, at the time is why I was supportive of the acquisition compared to what the alternative would have been, which would have been Activision-Blizzard continuing under Bobby Kotick, and likely, again, in my opinion, I think, based on what we were seeing of the company, would have led to more layoffs, more closures. That aside, I backed it, or I wouldn't say I backed it fully, but I was more in support of it because I saw labor unions supporting it. And they supported it because Microsoft had made a unionization neutrality pledge to win both their support and that of U.S. senators who'd expressed concerns over the deal's impact on labor. So as a way for Microsoft to win to win their case over the FTC to be able to acquire Activision Blizzard, they made the case that, hey, look, we are supporting union efforts. And in fact, Activision Blizzard, there is a union within the company. And it just so happens none of them were laid off in this round of layoffs. So the statement that this is from the Communication Workers of America on Microsoft's gaming cuts. Today's announcement by Microsoft underscores the importance of having a union voice on the job. With a union, employers are required to negotiate over the impact of layoffs. While CWA represented members at ZeniMax, Raven, and Blizzard Albany will not be impacted by these cuts, we are heartbroken that the lives of so many dedicated and talented video game workers will be disrupted. Not a single member in the union, in this case in Blizzard, because that's where the layoffs were impacted by this. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but being in a union leads to much greater job security. And I have to think that that is at least part of the reason why have been so many mass layoffs in the games industry, especially lately. There is just a severe lack of worker representation. They have very little say over whether it's benefits, whether it's pay, whether it's in the case of a layoff and how that would go forward. There is just very little representation that workers have in the industry. Shinobi writing here on Twitter, everybody working in games looking over their shoulder, wondering if their next is an incredibly unhealthy way to work and live. Depressing. This also goes to the point that Satoru Iwata made about worker morale. This is why unions are incredibly important and would be a massive boost to the games industry. This from Economics Policy Institute. Unions helped keep workers in jobs and paid during the pandemic. So they go through a lot of information here. By the way, I'll link to this. Or I think it's this page. I'll link to this below the video so you can go through all of this. But one example they bring up here is job losses greater among non-union workers than union workers in 2020. So employment changed by union status and sector from 2019 to 2020 in thousands. So the dark blue are people in a union who were let go. Light blue, people not in a union who were let go. And you can see the major discrepancy here. And yes, there are, I would imagine, in most of these industries, less people working in a union. Or I should say, there are probably less union workers than non-union workers. But even accounting for that discrepancy, you still have less people getting fired who are a part of a union. And part of that is just the simple fact that they have actual representation. They have a real voice. They have a contract in place stating how any sort of layoff would have to go. And a lot of employers just don't want to have to deal with that. It's easier for them just to cut the people that they can cut and let them go, and that's it. Whereas they have to actually negotiate with the unioned employees. So, as EPI writes here, this increase in the unionization rate was due in part to the fact that unionized workers have had a voice in how their employers have navigated the pandemic and have used this voice for such things as negotiating for terms of furloughs or work share arrangements to save jobs. And that's under the point of how union engagement likely played a role in limiting overall job loss among unionized workers during the pandemic. So simply having more of a say in the workplace allowed a lot of these unionized employees to keep their positions. And as I've shown in other videos, many other videos about unions, I bring this graph up because it is so, it explains very clearly the importance of unions, not just for people in a union, but for everybody in the workforce. So as they write here, as union membership declines, income inequality increases. You can see here, when unions were strong, more of the income was going to the average worker. When unions dropped off and there were less people in unions, there was a greater share of the income going to the top 10%. It's a direct connection here. You can see the before, the during, and the after. When unions were strong, when the workforce was strongest, is when unions were strongest. Look, obviously there's work involved in trying to put together a union in the games industry or joining an existing one. But this is something where if you work in the games industry, talk to your fellow workers. This is an area where there really has to be some inroads. And this is how you have some real say over your workplace and some real job security. So one example I just want to share, since this was one of the positive things I saw looking over the gamesindustry.biz site, UK Video Game Developer Union membership has been on the rise. So IWGB Game Workers membership has grown by almost 50% from from December 2022 to December 2023. So during all these layoffs, a lot of people in the games industry who work in the UK saw, hey, we need some say over our lives here. So more people joining a union, understanding the importance of being a part of that. Really good to see this in the UK. Let's hope this continues, internationally, because this is a serious problem. And it's going to continue being a serious problem as long as workers don't have say over the workplace.